It's like someone just slammed on the brakes. Like, for the whole global humanitarian system,
Yeah.
we're talking about completely stopping U.S. foreign aid, like all that USAID funding.
Right.
So today, we're going to like deep dive into this whole sudden freeze.
Yeah.
We've got a bunch of news articles and a super insightful analysis from a humanitarian expert
Yeah.
who's going to help us figure out what all this means.
Right.
Not just for the aid organizations themselves, but for, the people they're actually helping.
Exactly. And it's easy to kind of get lost in the headlines.
Right.
But the U.S. actually gave a massive $13.8 billion in humanitarian aid just in 2024.
I knew the U.S. was a big donor, but that's a lot.
To put that in perspective, that's more than like the next 10 biggest donors combined.
Wow. Okay. That puts it in perspective.
So no wonder everyone's kind of freaking out a bit.
Yeah.
The impact is being felt already.
Yeah.
Think of it like this.
Okay.
A clinic somewhere like rural Nepal.
They can't buy basic medicines
Oh, wow.
because the funding's just gone.
Yeah.
That's the situation that tons of organizations are facing right now.
Yeah.
Hundreds of USAID contractors,
Right.
either on unpaid leave
Yeah.
or they've completely lost their jobs.
Gosh.
Programs are being thrown into chaos. Some are having to completely shut down.
Yeah, I actually read this anecdote about aid workers in South Sudan.
Yeah.
They were like desperately trying to find flights
Oh, wow.
out of Juba
Yeah.
because of this sudden recall of expats.
Right.
Can you imagine the stress?
Absolutely. And amidst all this logistical craziness, it's the people who need help the most
Right.
that are suffering.
Right.
We're hearing reports of patients being discharged from healthcare centers. In Myanmar,
Yeah.
HIV programs are having to cut back services. And all those essential supports in refugee camps, like, they're on the verge of collapse.
It's like a humanitarian crisis
Yeah.
happening like right now. It is. It's unfolding in real time.
And then there's this life-saving assistance waiver the administration issued.
Yeah.
But that feels more like, I don't know, putting a Band-Aid on
Yeah.
a much bigger problem.
It does raise a lot of questions.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
what even falls under
Right.
emergency food assistance?
Yeah.
Does that include like programs that support sustainable agriculture?
Right.
Like helping communities to kind of be self-sufficient?
Exactly.
Or is it just straight up immediate food distribution?
Right. And how does this waiver even impact smaller local NGOs? They're the ones that are usually the closest to the communities.
Right.
Will they even qualify?
Right.
Or is the focus just on those big UN agencies?
And will this waiver
Right.
even apply equally across the board?
Right.
Or will certain countries be prioritized?
Right.
Potentially because it aligns with, U.S. foreign policy interests.
Yeah, I get that, the U.S. has their own interests, but
Yeah.
using humanitarian aid as like a political tool just feels, I don't know,
Yeah.
kind of icky.
Well, the lack of clarity is creating a lot of anxiety
Right.
for aid organizations.
Understandably.
It makes it almost impossible to plan effectively
Yeah.
and to send resources to where they're most needed.
This whole situation really shows how much the global humanitarian system depends
It does.
on U.S. funding.
Yeah.
The expert that we're looking at here,
Mhm.
they describe it as a
Yeah.
dangerous vulnerability.
Right.
Like putting all your eggs
Totally.
in one very fragile basket.
And the UN's financial tracking service
Okay.
really shows how much we rely on them.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine a pie chart
Okay.
that shows all the funding for the World Food Program.
Right.
Over half of that pie,
Yeah.
USA.
Whoa.
And now that piece is gone.
Right.
Same story for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees
Right.
and a ton of other international NGOs like
Yeah.
Save the Children,
No.
Mercy Corps.
So it's not just the big international players
It's
that are
right.
affected.
No.
The expert also talks about this subcontracting squeeze,
Right.
where cuts to larger agencies
Yeah,
end up hitting those smaller, more local NGOs even harder.
exactly.
They were already running on tiny budgets,
Yeah.
and now, well,
It's a cascade.
you're right.
And we can't forget about all those kind of hidden costs of program funding.
Right,
We always focus on like the money going directly to delivering aid,
right,
but funding also covers important things.
right.
Staff salaries, rent, IT infrastructure,
Right.
travel expenses.
And those financial management systems that
Yeah.
are like super important.
Yeah, for transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
Without that support, organizations could have to like lay off staff and
Yeah.
cut down their operations a ton.
It's like pulling the rug out from under them, right,
Yeah.
when they're needed the most.
Exactly.
So we've talked about this immediate chaos, but
Mm-hmm.
what about the long-term consequences?
Right.
If this freeze goes past the initial 90-day review,
Mm-hmm.
the expert suggests that things could get even worse.
Increased mortality and suffering.
Wow.
Because there's less access to healthcare, clean water, sanitation.
Right.
Imagine
Yeah.
a mother in a remote village
Mm.
can't get her sick child to a doctor.
Right.
because the local clinic had to close down.
It's awful.
That's the kind of, like, heartbreaking scenario that we
Mm.
could be facing.
And beyond that immediate human cost,
Hmm.
what about the broader impacts on society?
Well, this freeze could make existing crises even worse.
Okay.
Push fragile states
Right.
towards more instability and conflict.
Yeah.
Imagine a region
Yeah.
already struggling with drought and food insecurity,
Yeah.
then suddenly U.S. aid is pulled.
Right.
That could lead to mass displacement, social unrest, even violence.
And we can't forget about the potential for reversing decades of development gains.
Right, especially in countries that depend on U.S. aid.
It's like a huge step backward
It is.
after years of, difficult progress.
And then there's the whole issue of politicizing U.S. aid.
Right. We touched on that before.
If humanitarian assistance
Yeah.
is mainly being seen through this America First lens,
Right.
what does that even mean for those principles
Exactly.
of neutrality and impartiality
Yeah.
that have always been at the heart of humanitarian work?
If aid decisions
Yeah.
are being driven by politics
Right.
more than,
Yeah,
genuine need,
right.
it undermines the whole system.
It does.
Like, you can't trust it anymore.
Yeah.
And it makes it much harder
Right.
to actually deliver aid effectively.
But what's interesting is that
Yeah.
even with all this difficulty,
Yeah.
there are people calling for action,
Okay.
offering some, a little bit of hope.
Okay.
What are
great.
they saying?
Yeah. I'm ready for some good news. What are they suggesting?
They're saying the U.S. government needs to act quickly.
Okay.
Start by clarifying those life-saving assistance waivers
Right.
and speeding up the review process for existing grants.
Okay.
Basically, minimize the disruption and prevent things from getting even worse
Right.
while they figure out their long-term strategy.
So kind of damage control while they figure it out.
Exactly, but it's not all on the U.S.
Right.
They're also saying that other donor countries, foundations, even private companies
Okay.
need to step up
Mm,
and fill the gap.
I love that.
It's a call for shared responsibility,
It really is.
recognizing that global challenges need global solutions.
We're all interconnected.
Exactly.
We all have a role to play in this.
And there's another important part of this.
Okay.
Empowering local actors.
Yeah.
Moving away from that top-down approach.
Yeah.
Right.
And create effective solutions
Right, exactly.
than the people living through it every day.
Right.
It's about shifting the power dynamic
Yeah.
away from that donor-recipient model and creating real partnerships
Right.
where communities have a bigger voice
Right.
and agency in shaping their own futures.
And that goes back to what we were saying
does.
about the subcontracting squeeze.
Right.
If bigger agencies are getting cuts,
Right.
those local NGOs
Yeah.
will need direct support even more.
It's about building a more sustainable system
Yes.
where local actors aren't just seen as the people who carry out the plans,
Right.
but as leaders and partners
Exactly.
in the humanitarian response.
This has been
Yeah.
really eye-opening.
It's a complex issue.
Definitely.
There are no easy answers.
Right.
But by understanding the challenges
Yeah.
and exploring possible solutions,
Mm-hmm.
we can hopefully figure out how to navigate this new landscape
Right.
and work towards a world that's more just and fair. So as we kind of wrap up this first part of the deep dive,
Yeah.
what are your final thoughts for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is that
Yeah.
the future of global cooperation is at a crossroads. The
Yeah.
U.S. foreign aid freeze is a wake-up call.
Mm-hmm.
It shows just how fragile the current system is,
Right.
but it also gives us a chance
Yeah.
to build something better,
Yeah.
more resilient, more equitable.
Mhm.
The question is,
Yeah.
will we actually take that chance?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And I encourage you to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
What does the future of global cooperation look like to you?
Yeah.
What role do you want to play in making that future happen?
Right.
We want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah,
Keep the conversation going.
absolutely. Picking up where we left off, I think a story that really shows the direct impact of this freeze is what's happening in South Sudan right now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like there are reports of
Right.
aid workers like leaving in huge numbers because all the expat staff are suddenly being called back.
So they're just like pulling everyone out.
Basically,
What does that even look like, you know?
it's chaos.
Yeah.
Local airline offices are totally swamped.
Right.
People are like desperately trying to get flights out of Juba.
Wow.
It's a total logistical nightmare.
It sounds like a movie or something.
Yeah.
And what about the people who actually depend on these aid programs?
Right. They're the ones stuck in the middle of all this.
Right.
Healthcare centers in Myanmar are having to like discharge patients
Oh, wow.
because they can't afford to keep treating them.
Yeah.
HIV programs are having to cut back services, which
Mhm.
could mean interrupting really important treatment.
Right.
And those essential supports in refugee camps,
Right.
like food distribution and sanitation, they're just falling apart.
So the immediate impact is like really bad.
It's devastating.
But we were talking about that life-saving assistance waiver earlier.
Yeah.
Isn't that supposed to like help with some of this?
It's supposed to, but there's so many questions around it.
Right.
The expert we're reading is pointing out that it's not even clear what counts as emergency food assistance.
Yeah, we were talking about that before. Like,
Yeah.
does it include things like agricultural support programs?
Yeah, exactly.
Because those are, super important for long-term food security.
Right.
But are they life-saving in the, immediate sense?
That's the question.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we don't really have a clear answer.
Right.
And this ambiguity is paralyzing for aid organizations.
I can imagine.
They're stuck. They can't make decisions about resources
Right.
or plan their programs.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to navigate a maze,
Right.
but they're blindfolded.
And it's not just about what's life-saving.
Right.
We also don't know which organizations are actually eligible for this waiver.
Exactly.
Will smaller, more grassroots NGOs have access?
Right, the ones closest to the communities.
Exactly.
Or will it only be the bigger UN agencies?
It's a big question.
And then there's a question of geography.
Right. Like, will it apply everywhere?
Yeah, will it be applied equally all over the world?
Yeah.
Or will some countries be given priority?
Right.
Maybe because it, fits with U.S. foreign policy goals.
It's a lot of valid concerns.
It is.
And this lack of transparency just leads to speculation and distrust.
Exactly.
Aid organizations are left wondering if their work even fits with this America First idea.
Right. It's really chilling for the whole sector.
So it sounds like this waiver, which was supposed to be,
Yeah.
a lifeline,
Mm-hmm.
is actually making things worse.
Unfortunately, yeah.
And when we think about the long-term consequences of this freeze,
Yeah.
things get even more concerning.
The expert is warning that we could see
Yeah.
a surge in preventable deaths and
Yeah.
suffering
Yeah.
because people won't have access to basic things like healthcare, clean water, and sanitation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine a mother in a remote village.
Yeah.
She can't get her sick child to a doctor
Oh, right.
because the local clinic had to close.
Yeah.
That's the kind of situation we could be looking at.
Yeah. That's awful.
And beyond that immediate human cost,
Right.
there are the broader societal impacts.
Like what?
Well, this freeze could make existing crises even worse.
Okay.
Push already fragile states
Right.
toward instability and conflict.
I can see that.
Imagine a region
Okay.
that's already dealing with drought and food insecurity,
Yeah.
and then U.S. aid is suddenly pulled back.
Right. It could tip the scales.
Exactly. It could lead to mass displacement, social unrest, even violence.
And, we can't forget about the possibility of reversing decades of progress.
Exactly, especially in countries that rely heavily on U.S. support.
It's like we're going back in time.
It is.
After all this hard work.
And then there's that whole issue
Yeah.
of politicizing USI.
Right. We talked about that.
If humanitarian assistance
Right.
is being seen through an America First lens,
Right.
what does that mean for those principles of neutrality and impartiality?
Right. Like, those are fundamental
They are.
to humanitarian work.
If aid decisions are being driven by politics
Yeah.
rather than actual need,
Right.
it undermines the whole system.
Yeah. It makes it really hard to trust
It does.
and to actually deliver aid effectively.
But here's what's interesting.
All right.
Despite all this, there are voices calling for action,
Okay, good.
offering some hope.
I was wondering when we'd get back to that.
Right.
What are some of the solutions they're proposing?
They're urging the U.S. government to act fast.
Okay.
Start by clarifying those life-saving assistance waivers
Uh-huh.
and speeding up the review process for existing grants.
So basically,
Yeah.
damage control.
Minimize the disruption
Right.
and stop things from getting even worse
Right.
while they figure out a long-term plan.
Right. Buy some time.
Exactly.
But it's not just about the U.S.
It's not. They're also calling on other countries, foundations, even private companies
Okay.
to step up and fill the gap.
I like that.
It's a call for shared responsibility.
Yeah.
Recognizing that these global challenges need global solutions.
We're all in this together.
Exactly.
We all have a part to play.
And another key part of this
Okay.
is empowering local actors.
Right.
We need to move away from that top-down approach
Yeah, I agree.
and recognize the expertise and the abilities that are already there in the communities.
Yeah. It just makes sense.
Who better to understand the situation
Right.
and create effective solutions
Exactly.
than the people living through it every day?
It's about shifting the power away from that donor-recipient model.
Right.
And building real partnerships.
Exactly.
Where communities have more of a say in their own futures. And this ties into what we were talking about earlier.
It does.
With the subcontracting squeeze.
Right.
If the big agencies are facing cuts, those local NGOs are going to need even more support.
It's about creating a more sustainable system
Mm-hmm.
where local actors aren't just seen as implementers,
Right.
but as leaders
Yeah.
and partners in the response.
This is all really thought-provoking.
It's a complex issue,
It is.
but by understanding the challenges and
Right.
looking at possible solutions,
Yeah.
we can hopefully navigate this new reality and work towards a more just and equitable world.
I'm curious,
Yeah.
knowing what you do about
Mm.
listeners' job industry area of expertise,
Yeah.
have you seen anything like this play out in your own work?
And what concerns or questions does this deep dive bring up for you?
Right.
What actions do you think would be most effective in dealing with the damage from this freeze?
Yeah, those are good questions.
We'll dig into those and more in part 3.
So we've been talking about all the fallout from this U.S. foreign aid freeze,
Yeah,
and it seems like the impact goes way beyond just messing up programs.
it does.
It's like we're seeing a huge change
Mm-hmm.
in the whole global humanitarian world.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Right, yeah.
The expert we're looking at says this freeze could change the whole system,
Right.
and not in a good way.
One thing that keeps coming up
Yeah,
is this, like loss of trust.
right.
The U.S. basically pulled the rug out
Yeah.
from all these organizations.
Mm-hmm.
That's got to have consequences.
It does. These organizations feel betrayed.
Right.
They don't know what's coming next.
Right.
That makes it way harder to deal with crises effectively.
Yeah.
Like partnerships that took decades to build
Right.
are suddenly in trouble.
Yeah.
It's like trying to rebuild on like shaky ground.
And what about the U.S.'s role as a global leader in all this?
Right.
They've been setting the agenda for years.
Yeah.
Getting resources, encouraging other countries to do more.
Mm-hmm.
If they step back, what happens then?
It's a good question.
Right.
If this America First thing becomes normal,
Yeah.
it could mean they're pulling back from global stuff altogether. And that leaves a gap
Yeah.
that other actors might jump into.
Right.
And some of them might not have good intentions.
That's a little scary to think about.
It is, but the expert we're reading,
Yeah.
they're not just warning us.
Yeah.
They're offering some solutions too.
Good. I like solutions.
They talk about this idea of collective action.
Yeah, they're saying this crisis,
Mm-hmm.
as bad as it
Yeah.
is also a chance to rethink the system,
Right.
make it stronger and fairer.
So we're not so reliant on one big donor.
Like diversify the funding.
Exactly. Get more from other countries.
Okay.
Bigger role for foundations.
Mm-hmm.
Even look at new ways of funding.
Like what?
Things like social impact bonds.
Okay, so spread the risk,
Yeah.
make the system less vulnerable.
Right. So it's not all riding on one country's decisions.
Right.
And they also talk about how important it is to empower local actors.
Yeah, that's come up a lot.
Move away from that top-down approach.
Yeah.
Recognize the expertise that's already there.
Right, in the communities themselves.
It's about using that local knowledge
Yeah.
instead of always dictating from above.
So true.
Move away from that old donor-recipient model.
Mm-hmm.
Build real partnerships
Yeah.
where communities have more control over their own future.
This has been a really fascinating conversation.
It has.
Thanks for explaining all this to me.
No problem. It's a complicated issue.
Yeah.
No easy answers.
Right.
But by understanding the problems
Yeah.
and exploring different solutions, we
Mhm.
can hopefully figure out how to move forward
Right.
and build a more just and equitable world.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
any final thoughts for our listeners?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway here
Mhm.
is that we're at a turning point for global cooperation.
Right.
The U.S. aid freeze is a wake-up call,
Yeah.
showing us how fragile the current system is.
But it's also a chance to build something better.
Exactly, something more resilient, more equitable.
Right. The question is,
Will we actually take that chance?
that's a great question for everyone listening.
Yeah.
Think about what that future looks like to you. What role do you want to play in making that future a reality?
And let us know what you think.
Yeah, keep the conversation going.